You spend hours poring over your books, highlighting every other sentence until your notes look like a rave party flyer from the 90s. And still, when the exam comes around, you can't remember a single thing. Or you're reading the same paragraph for the fifth time thinking, what the hell did I just read? While your brain is secretly planning tonight's Netflix lineup. Don't worry, you're not alone. I used to be the king of ineffective studying, so bad that I actually had to repeat a class. Picture this. Me sitting there with 15 different colored highlighters, genuinely thinking I was being productive. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. Today I'm going to show you how to study effectively, and by that I mean how to actually remember what you're learning, instead of just staring at books for hours on end. By the end of this video you will understand exactly why most study methods are a complete waste of time, and you will walk away with practical techniques you can start using right away to transform the way you learn. But why should 2D guy know how to study? Well, I have experienced both sides. My academic journey ranged from oops, I have to repeat the class, all the way to graduating with a master's degree in mechanical engineering with a 4.0 GPA. And no, I didn't suddenly turn into a genius. I just stopped wasting my time on study methods that are about as effective as trying to memorize the phone book while scrolling through TikTok. But this isn't about me. These methods are backed by decades of scientific research. You can find all the studies mentioned in the video linked in the description. So far so good. The entire system is made up of 3 parts. First, I will explain how you can learn more with less effort. Then I will show you how to actually remember what you've learned in the long term. And in part 3, it's all about not just remembering what you learned, but truly understanding it. And the best part? You won't need 15 highlighters for any of this. There's even a little bonus tip at the end. So let's jump right into the most important concept. Most people learn passively. But what exactly does passive learning mean? It's when you consume information without actively engaging with it. Think of highlighting text, rereading notes, or just watching lectures and videos without interacting with the material. The problem, when you learn passively, your brain doesn't form strong neural connections. It's like watching someone else work out and expecting your biceps to grow. Doesn't work, unfortunately. In practice, it looks something like this. Let's say you're studying for a biology exam. The passive approach would be reading the textbook chapter on cell division, highlighting key terms, and maybe rewriting your notes. You feel super productive because you're busy, but research shows you will only retain 10 to 20% of what you read this way. This is where active learning, or more specifically, active recall comes in. Active recall means forcing your brain to retrieve information from memory. So instead of just reading about cell division, you would close your book and try to explain the process from memory. What are the phases of mitosis? What happens in each phase? You're prompting your brain to actively recall that info, which is exactly what you will need to do during the exam. According to studies, this method helps you retain up to 80% of the information you study. Okay, 80% with active learning versus 20% with passive learning sounds great. But how exactly do you do it? Let me show you 2 simple ways to incorporate active recall into your study routine. First, turn your notes into questions. Instead of writing mitosis has 4 phases, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, write what are the 4 phases of mitosis. When reviewing, you will see the question first and have to recall the answer before checking if you were right. Back in my day, I had to do this manually, but now you can even use ChatGPT to turn your study material into questions. Ideally, you should use flashcards for this, so you can instantly check the answer to your self-made questions. Trust me, flashcards are your ultimate secret weapon. Here's what you should keep in mind. Don't just flip through them passively. Really try to recall the answer before turning the card over. And here's the key. Don't immediately remove cards you answered correctly. Research shows that you need to recall something correctly at least 3 to 4 times before it actually transfers into your long-term memory. More on that in the next section. Second, use practice tests. This is probably the most powerful study method out there. Get your hands on old tests and solve them. If there are no past exams available, create your own practice questions based on your material or use ChatGPT. Especially in school or university, upcoming exams often don't differ that much from previous ones. Take the practice tests without looking at your notes and then check your answers. The questions you get wrong reveal your weak spots, and that's where you should focus your energy. Now, some of you might be thinking, ooh, this feels harder than just reading my notes. And you're absolutely right. It is harder. That's exactly why it works. That feeling of difficulty is a sign your brain is building stronger connections. When I was studying for my master exams, I created a system where I turned all my lecture notes into questions. Then I regularly tested myself and spent more time on the questions I got wrong. It felt challenging, but the results were undeniable. I remembered more and understood the material on a deeper level. So here's your first action step. Take whatever you're currently studying and turn at least a part of it into questions that force you to recall the information from memory. Even just 15 minutes of active recall is more effective than hours of passive review. Now, to actually retain what you've learned, we need to combine it with our next principle. Now that we understand active recall, let's talk about when and how often we should use it. This is where spaced repetition comes in. Have you ever studied all night for an exam, felt like you knew everything, and then a week later you could barely remember any of it? That's because of the forgetting curve. It was discovered by a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus back in the 1880s, and it shows how quickly we forget information if we don't review it. Within 24 hours of learning something new, you forget about 70% of it. But here's the good news. Ebbinghaus also found that every time you actively review the material, the forgetting curve becomes less steep. In other words, you forget more slowly with each review. So the solution is to move away from the last minute learning. Instead, try starting earlier and spread your study sessions out over several days. Each review should happen right before you're about to forget the material. This way of learning is not only way less stressful than learning everything at once, it's also much more effective in the long run. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Imagine you want to learn 20 vocabulary words. Option A, learn all at once. You sit down for 2 hours on Sunday and try to learn all 20 words at once. By the next day, you've already forgotten more than half of it. Option B, spaced repetition. You learn 5 words on Sunday, 5 new ones on Monday, plus review the previous 5 new ones on Tuesday, plus review the previous 10, 5 new ones on Wednesday, plus review the previous 15. On Thursday, you will review all 20. Depending on how complex the material is, you can continue reviewing it at increasingly longer intervals, like after 2 days, 4 days, 1 week, 2 weeks. Each review doesn't have to take long, just long enough to actively recall the information. This method might take slightly more total time than the all-at-once approach, but I promise you, after these spaced reviews, the vocabulary will stick in your long-term memory. You can also use spaced repetition software for this. The great thing is that you can create digital flashcards, so no more thousands of paper cards scattered around your house. Plus, these tools often include stats and fun features that actually makes learning more enjoyable. I used Anki back in the day. It's free and automatically schedules your flashcards based on how well you know each one. Cards you struggle with appear more often and the ones you've mastered show up less frequently. When I was working on my master's degree, I used Anki religiously. I created flashcards for key concepts and formulas, and the spaced repetition algorithm made sure I was reviewing the right material at the right time. In one study, researchers compared students who studied the same material for 8 hours in one sitting with students who spread those 8 hours over several days. A month later, the spaced learning group remembered about 40% more, despite both groups spending the exact same amount of time studying. So here's your action step for spaced repetition. Take what you are currently learning and break it into at least 3 to 4 shorter study sessions spread out over the next week. Use active recall during each session and I promise you will be amazed how much better you retain the information. But knowing something is only half the battle. To truly master a topic, you need to be able to apply it and explain it to others. And that's exactly what we will cover next. We've now talked about how to get information into your brain using active recall and how to keep it there using spaced repetition. But there's a third level to truly mastering a topic, the ability to apply it and to teach it to others. This is where the Feynman Technique comes in. Named after Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman, this technique is based on a simple idea. If you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't really understand it. Here's how the Feynman Technique works in 4 easy steps. Step 1. Choose a concept you want to learn and write it at the top of a blank page. Step 2. Explain the concept in your own words as if you were teaching it to someone else. Use simple language as if you were explaining it to a 12-year-old. Step 3. Review your explanation and identify areas where you got stuck or where you had to use complex terminology. Those are the gaps in your understanding. Step 4. Go back to your source material, revisit those tricky areas and simplify your explanation. What makes this technique so powerful is that it forces you to confront what you don't know. It's easy to read something and think, yeah, I get that. But when you try to explain it without notes, the holes in your knowledge become instantly clear. Let me give you a real example from my own experience. When I was studying in mathematical methods for simulation during my masters, I thought I had understood how to calculate the curl of a vector field using the Nabla operator. But when I tried to explain it to my study partner without looking at my notes, I suddenly couldn't remember exactly how to express the Nabla operator as a cross product with a vector field.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
That instantly showed me what I need to focus on. I went back to my textbook, studied that specific section in more detail, and then tried explaining it again. After a few rounds, I was able to explain the entire concept clearly and simple. Now you might be thinking, but I don't have anyone to teach this stuff to. That's totally fine. You can explain it out loud to yourself. Yes, talking to yourself is actually a legit study technique. Write your explanation down as if you were creating a simple guide. Find a study partner, or explain it to a friend or family member even if they don't understand the topic. The key is to articulate the concept without looking at your notes. The act of retrieving and reorganizing the information in a way that makes sense to someone else is what really locks it into your brain. During my studies, I found that the concepts I could clearly explain to others were the ones I performed best with on exams. It wasn't just about memorizing facts, it was about truly understanding the material on a deeper level. So here's your action step. Take a concept you're currently learning and try explaining it in simple terms, either out loud or in writing, without looking at your notes. Identify where you get stuck, go back and review those areas and then try again. Keep doing this until you can explain the entire concept clearly and simply. As promised, here's a bonus tip that made a huge difference for me: the power of study groups. A lot of people think study groups are just about dividing up the work or explaining concepts to each other. That can be helpful, but the real power lies in something else: accountability and instant feedback. When I explained concepts to my study partners, I got immediate feedback on whether my explanation actually made sense. The perspective also helped me break through mental blocks and understanding topics more quickly. Once I committed to meeting them at a specific time, it became way less likely that I would flake out or procrastinate. And seeing everyone else study somehow motivated me to do it too. Like they say, a problem shared is a problem halved. The key here is finding the right study partners. People who are just as committed as you are and whose learning style complements yours. Alright, we covered the 3 key principles that transformed the way I study, and they can do the same for you. Active recall instead of passive reading, spaced repetition to beat the forgetting curve, and the Feynman Technique to deepen your understanding. Now I want to challenge you to actually apply what you've learned. Because let's be real, just watching this video isn't going to improve your grades. So here's what I want you to do. Pick just one of these techniques to try out this week. Don't try to overhaul your entire study system overnight. Maybe start with active recall. Take something you're currently learning and create 10 questions that force you to retrieve the information from memory. Or try the Feynman technique with a concept you are struggling to understand. Whatever you choose, commit to it for 1 week. Then pay attention to the difference it makes. I guarantee you will notice an improvement in how much you remember and how well you understand the material. And I would love to hear about your experience with it. Leave a comment sharing which technique you tried and how it worked for you. Your comment might help another student who's dealing with the same challenges as you are. Remember, effective studying isn't about putting in more hours. It's about using your hours better. You don't have to be naturally gifted or bury your face in books 24/7 to excel academically. You just need to study smarter. I went from repeating a grade to graduating with a perfect score by using these exact methods. They worked for me, they've worked for thousands of other students, and they can work for you. Good luck.